Well, this morning, America just issued a travel warning for South Africa, warning all Americans that it's not safe to travel there. The Trump administration cites terrorism and violence as the reason for raising this alarm. And this comes a week after President Trump called attention to what he said was white genocide there of white farmers in South Africa, the targeted violence, murder against those farmers. The mainstream media said it was all BS, called him out on that, said it was all a fake story. Others, even in our chat room right now, saying it's a fake story, that this is all cover for what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's a fake story in South Africa, and it's all in an effort to distract you from the genocide that's taking place in Gaza. I mean, it's an interesting argument here. So Americans might have a casual understanding of what's happening in South Africa. They'll say, you know, what's happening over there doesn't affect me. But our next guest is warning people to pay attention to the genocide in South Africa because the deep state plan doesn't stop there. He should know he lived in South Africa. Free speech is under attack, but Rumble refuses to back down on this. We've always believed in empowering voices, no matter how unpopular. And now we're taking that fight to the next level when major advertisers conspired to pull their dollars. Even brands like Dunkin' Donuts turned their backs on shows like ours, claiming Rumble had a right-wing culture. But we're not here to fit a mold. We are here to defend free expression. Right now, for a limited time, you can get $10 off an annual plan using the promo code Redacted. Just visit rumble.com/premium/redacted and claim your discount code today. Just use that code Redacted. Journalist Alex Newman says, quote, "What's happening down there to them is a microcosm, and that's what they have planned for you, your country, your family, and what's left of the Christian West. We are in grave danger as a nation." And Alex joins us now. Alex, did I get that quote correct? We are in grave danger as a nation?
Absolutely. It's great to see you both. Thank you for having me. And what's happening in South Africa is the model. It is the template that they plan to use on us. In fact, right now it's targeting the Afrikaner. The Afrikaners call us the Amerikaners. Our histories are intimately intertwined. In fact, the Afrikaner people are the closest cousins that Americans have anywhere in the world. They came from the same places, generally held the same cultural and religious values. And, I think it's a mistake to racialize it like some in the media are trying to do. They're trying to paint Donald Trump as a racist for talking about this. I don't think it's that the communists and the globalists and the deep staters hate these people because they have lighter skin, but they have several other strikes against them, right? For one, they're mostly Christian. And as we know, Christianity is not compatible with communism, with totalitarianism, with globalism, etc. They also are farmers. They're producing food. In fact, these are some of the most productive farmers on the face of the earth that have ever lived on the face of the earth. And if you want to control people, the totalitarians have understood for a long time, control their food and control their energy. Well, what we're watching in South Africa, again, is a microcosm of what they plan for the world. And I'll try to explain it quickly. South Africa is not a real nation, right? And that's the first thing that people need to understand. There is no nation called South Africa. South Africa is a landmass. It's a region of the world that has a lot of different nations in it. The Afrikaner nation is one of those nations. It is a true nation in the truest sense. It's got a shared culture, shared language, shared history, shared religious tradition, kind of Calvinist, Reformed Christianity. And then there are other nations down there that share the same space. The Zulu nation, which many times throughout South African history has been allied with the Afrikaner nation. The Xhosa nation of Nelson Mandela, the Venda. A lot of those nations are now independent. During apartheid, they tried to give them self-government. The Venda, the Tswana in Botswana, the Swazi in Swaziland. But what they've done in South Africa is they've amalgamated all of these historically very different nations under one unitary totalitarian regime. And that's what they're now trying to do at the global level. If you listen to the former Secretary General describe the UN General Assembly as the Parliament of Humanity, if you look at the G77 plus China and the BRICS describing the UN General Assembly as an emblem of global sovereignty, it doesn't take a lot of dot connecting to realize Americans have one vote in the UN General Assembly. What will happen if 193 other governments decide they want our land, they want our farms, they want our lives, they want our guns, they want our liberties? Well, the same exact thing that's happening to the Afrikaner right now. So, folks, it's not just some isolated conflict in a faraway land. It is the template. When you listen to Barack Obama, he actually says he was inspired to get into politics by South Africa. That was his first political action. The same plan, even the same tactics that they're using right now against the Afrikaners in South Africa are going to be deployed, and in many cases already are being deployed against Americans today.
What are those tactics specifically? Can you go more in depth about that?
There's a lot of them, right? And we could probably spend 2 weeks talking about it. But one of the very obvious ones is filling the country with foreigners, right? During the apartheid government, and nobody wants to defend apartheid, obviously, but during apartheid, you had millions of black Africans immigrating into South Africa, legally and illegally, right? They were flooding into the country. A lot of them were being sent by hostile governments. If you look at what was happening with the Afrikaners, the entire world allied against them. The Soviet Union, the communist regimes in Cuba, in Angola, in Mozambique, Libya, all over the world. And then the deep state in the United States, the David Rockefellers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Henry Kissingers of the world, all allied against this tiny little group. And what they were doing was they were flooding that country with immigrants and teaching all these immigrants that this is a racist society. It needs to be absolutely dismantled and crushed. That's what they were teaching the children in the schools. Same exact thing happening in America. Now, again, I want to emphasize this. The issue is never the issue with the communists. That's what they used to say back in the 70s. The issue is always the revolution. So they'll make it about race. They'll make it about climate change. They'll make it about whatever they think will be likely to come up with public support. But just to illustrate how phony the racial pretext is, the South African Communist Party, which has controlled the African National Congress for many, many decades. I mean, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the South African Communist Party, which itself was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Their original slogan when they became active in Southern Africa, by the way, it was the first Communist Party started outside of the Soviet Union by the Soviets, was "Whites of South Africa unite to keep South Africa white." Right? So when they realized that horse probably wasn't going to run very well, they jumped onto the black liberation struggle as the pretext, but the revolution was the same. Now look at what they're doing to us in the United States. Exactly the same process, exactly the same rhetoric, exactly the same effort to stir up civil unrest and ultimately violence, and the same exact narrative, right? And this isn't just being taught to American children. This is being taught to people around the world in the fake media. America is being demonized. Calls for global governance are accelerating. So take what happened in South Africa, merging all these very different nations under one unitary totalitarian regime. Move that up to the international level, where Americans are one solitary nation, all unified under this unitary regime, and you see the same process. And I would encourage people to go read something I wrote. You can find it on my website. I originally wrote it for a book about Barack Obama. On my website, libertysentinel.org, it's called To Understand Obama, You Must Understand South Africa's Communist Revolution. What I go through and do there is quote Barack Obama on all of these issues, and you will see very clearly how all of this is what inspired him to get involved. He says it himself, right? You see the key players involved intersecting with Barack Obama. So the same revolution that is taking place in South Africa now is going global. And Americans, you are the last thing standing in the way.
No, there's so much ignorance when people are sort of boiling this down to, is there a genocide or isn't there? Is it just unsafe for white people? Should they go back, right? CNN saying, well, they can go back. They don't say that about the Zulus, who are not native to South Africa and did, in fact, colonize other black people. So, but what do you say to this idea that it is unsafe across the board in South Africa? So why did the Trump administration only single out the whites to save them, so to speak, offer them safety? Is there anybody speaking for the blacks who are also victims of violence?
Yeah, well, there's a very serious element of truth in the fact that crime is out of control in South Africa, right? Even when I lived there 20 years ago, it was a disaster. Today, it is one of the most violent, murderous societies on the face of the earth, which is what tends to happen when you amalgamate a bunch of different nations together under a communist, unitary, corrupt, racist regime. That's to be expected. But we need to be very clear here, right? When they talk about normal crime and normal murders, and this was, again, a problem when I lived there 20 years ago, they're talking about somebody pulls up next to you at a street light and blows your brains out and steals your car. What's happening with these Afrikaners is something totally, totally different. Okay. And again, I didn't start speaking out about this publicly until 2012. I would highly recommend people go back and read it. It was a cover story that I did for the New American magazine called Genocide and Communism Threaten South Africa. Everything that's happening today was happening back then. And the straw that broke the camel's back for me, where I said, you know what, I don't care what people say, I don't care what people think, somebody has to speak out about this, was a fact-finding mission that Dr. Gregory Stanton had made to South Africa back in 2012. Now, he was an anti-apartheid activist, kind of on the left, right? I mean, I don't know how he would describe himself, but he certainly strikes me as more of a liberal. He went down there and looked at this, looked at the evidence, and said, wow, South Africa is at stage 6 out of 8 on the genocide scale. He had developed a genocide scale. He's changed it somewhat. But in 2012, he said the Afrikaners are now on the verge of being exterminated. Stage 6 was the planning and preparation for the slaughter. Stage 7 was the slaughter itself. Stage 8 was denial after the fact. So that was the genocide scale. He said Afrikaners are now at stage 6. And the reason why he said that was very obvious. The president of the country, Jacob Zuma, the polygamist pagan leader of the ANC and president of the Republic of South Africa, was going on TV, was standing in stadiums singing, "Bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot all the Boers. My cabinet's going to help me shoot all the Boers." You had Jacob Zuma, Julius Malema, who Trump showed a few videos of him in the Oval Office the other day. At the time, he was the leader of the youth wing of the African National Congress, the party that has ruled South Africa with the Communist Party going clear back to when the Afrikaners voted to surrender power in the early 90s. He was singing, "We're going to shoot the Boer. We're going to kill the Boer." Now, the fake media says, don't believe your lying eyes. That doesn't really mean they're going to shoot the Boer. That doesn't really mean they're going to kill the Boer. It's exactly what it means. And if you look at these farm attacks, it is so horrific, you can't even put it into words. We're talking raping babies. We're talking drilling old women with electric drills and filling them with holes. We're talking about using blowtorches to burn and torture people for hours on end. We're talking about dragging innocent people for miles behind a pickup truck along dirt roads. These are crimes that are so barbaric you can't even begin to imagine. And then what often happens afterward is they'll leave Bible pages on their dead bodies. They'll leave the family Bible on the desecrated bodies of these victims who've been tortured sometimes for days on end. That's not normal crime, regardless of what Ramaphosa and the fake media want you to think. These are targeted attacks aimed at exterminating this particular category of Christian agricultural person that is standing in the way of the revolution. And the South African revolutionaries were always very clear.
May I ask you a question about this?
Please.
A timely question, because today the Pope spoke about spreading Christianity throughout Africa. So does this put Black people at risk too if they adopt Christianity?
Of course it does. And that's one of the and again, this is not a racial issue. The media wants to racialize it so that people won't talk about it. The ANC was so brutal to everyone who opposed it, especially blacks, right? When the effort to stop the revolution was underway, it was actually the Zulus who allied with the Afrikaners. The Inkatha Freedom Party was one of the strongest forces in the Afrikaner coalition trying to prevent the Soviet-backed overthrow and revolution that was going to take over South Africa. But you didn't hear about that. And the punishments that they would mete out to people. Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, was on video saying we're going to liberate our country with matches and necklaces. Well, what does that mean? It's what they were doing, not just to the Zulus, but even to their own people that they suspected. They would put a tire filled with petrol around the necks of these people, set it on fire with a match, and it was one of the most gruesome deaths that a person could ever imagine. They were primarily using that against black people in South Africa who opposed their revolution. Now, granted, they were killing anybody that they could get their hands on. They were planting bombs at bars and shopping malls. They were planting mines on farm roads to kill farmers and farm workers alike. So they were very indiscriminate in their slaughter, but they were especially brutal to their black compatriots. You look at what they were doing in the Quatro torture camps up in Angola to blacks, right? So it's not a racial thing. It is an effort to eliminate this last little outpost of Western Christian civilization on the continent of Africa so that they can then pave the way to total tyranny. And again, it's a precursor of what they're planning to what's left of the Christian West if we don't wake up and if we don't call it out.
Can you draw some parallels to what you're seeing there currently and into the United States? I mean, obviously, you talk about some of these green policies, green energy policies, and things like that, right? The effort by the United Nations and others to come in and basically steal your land, right? You will own nothing and you will be happy. We'll take your land because your carbon footprint is too much. But can you draw some more parallels and connections between what's happening in South Africa and what we can expect in the United States?
Sure. I would start by encouraging people to look at the narrative, right? I was still way too young to pay any attention to this, but if you go back to the 1980s into the early 1990s, Afrikaners were demonized by the entire world media. as these savage, barbarian, white supremacist monsters who were just there to murder, kill, destroy, steal land, etc. Nothing could be further from the truth. Again, these are Christian people. They did inherit some elements of a bad system from the British Empire. They fought the British Empire. They tried to keep their independent little republics there. They lost. We won when we fought as Americans. They lost. They were absorbed into the British Empire. And so some of these oppressive race-based laws, which were on their way out, continued under Afrikaner rule. But the demonization campaign against the Afrikaners is almost exactly parallel to what we're seeing right now against the United States. If you look at the global media coverage, for example, just a recent one that people will remember of George Floyd, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. America was demonized in the entire world press as some sort of terrible, evil, racist society that filled with crazy racist white cops running around murdering innocent black people with no repercussions at all. It's the exact same narrative we saw in South Africa. None of the extenuating circumstances were mentioned. None of that was talked about. It was all aimed at demonizing this particular group of people. That's the same thing that's happening around the world right now. America and, by the way, a lot of Western Europe are being demonized as white supremacist, colonialist through the critical race theory lens. Same exact analytical tool that was used in South Africa to bring about this change. You look at the open border, right? Everybody heard terrible things about apartheid, which means separate development. Their thinking was, hey, there's a lot of nations here. We ought to try to give them self-government in their own homelands. Again, was it implemented well? Absolutely not. Their thinking was, hey, in Europe, Hungarians have Hungary. The Finnish people have Finland. The Swedes have Sweden. Why not have the Zulus have their own Zululand? Why not have the Swazi have Swaziland? Why not have the Tswana have Botswana? Why not have the Zoto people live in Lesotho and govern themselves, right? That was the thinking, at least. And what we saw, rather than an honest assessment of the failings of that, was a campaign of total slander, that everything they did was racist, etc. Same thing we're seeing right now with the demonization of the United States. And as all that demonization was going on against South Africa, what they didn't tell you was millions of Africans were flooding into South Africa. Why? Because as unsavory as the apartheid system may have been, that government, and this always shocks people to hear this, that government had the best human rights record of any government on the African continent. And if you don't believe me, find me one that breaks that rule, right? Look at the communist dictatorships, the barbarians that were ruling some of those other countries. So that's why they were flooding in there. And then what happened? The Afrikaner population became a smaller and smaller minority. The demonization campaign got more and more out of control. And eventually you ended up in a situation where the Afrikaners gave up political power, surrendered, and now they are, as Cyril Ramaphosa, the current president who was just in the Oval Office, explained, we're going to boil them slowly like frogs. That's what's happening now, is the boiling.
Well, I mean, we've spoken personally, Natalie and I both, to those who fled South Africa, white family, and would tell us the awful, awful violence that they incurred, just pulling up to traffic lights, the having their cars taken, shot in the head, stolen. Awful.
They
awful
don't
things.
drive at night. Full stop. You just don't drive at night for any reason.
Grabbing husbands, forcing them to watch the rape of their wives in front of them by having their eyes held open by.
One friend said that when they pull up to the robot, which is what they call the stoplight, you tell your child, if someone comes near the door, near the car, get out of the car seat, get in mommy's lap, and we're going to run. And this is the way that they live.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard, I'm sure you've witnessed these stories when you live there. This is probably
never-ending amounts of them. That's right. It's just a normal part of life there.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's wild.
Alex, thank you so much. So your website, give us your website again so people can read that first.
Well, thank you guys very much. My personal website's libertysentinel.org. I also do a show for Unified TV. It's like Netflix, but where the stuff that Netflix won't carry because it's too controversial goes. So you can check out the Alex Newman show on Unified, and then my personal website, libertysentinel.org, where I've got a lot of this information on South Africa.
And are there any other books from other sources that you would recommend our audience if our audience is sitting there saying, I don't believe any of this. This is all garbage. This sounds like all made up. Can you point to maybe one or two sources that people, if they want to educate themselves on this topic, they can do more of a deep dive?
There are so many great books on this subject that have been deliberately buried by the fake media and the establishment, but I'll recommend one. And if people are interested in this, and they should get a copy of this book. It's called Amabulu, The Birth and Death of the Second America. And it's written by an Afrikaner. He was actually an engineer. He now lives in the West, of course. But he traces the history of South Africa through the lens of his own family. They started arriving down there in the mid 1600s when Dutch settlers were originally landing down on the Western Cape. And so he traces the history of South Africa through the lens of his own family. It is an incredibly good book. I've got a few little differences of opinion that I have shared with the author, Dr. Harry Booyens, but it is an incredible masterpiece, and it will tell the story better than any other single book that I can think of.
You're right. They don't want me to see this. I clicked it on Goodreads and got an error message.
Yeah, I love
surprise.
These are the types of books. Yes, these are the types of books we like to read here at Redacted.
When the algorithm does it, like, nope, you're not supposed to read that.
Yeah,
then I want it.
The Birth and Death of the Second America. Yeah, The Birth and Death of the Second America. I just found it on Amazon, so you can find it there, and your local library. Maybe your local library will carry it as well. Alex, great to see you. Thank you so much for educating us on this topic. We appreciate it, and we should all be more vigilant on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.